So, we all use ride hailing apps, right? It's just part of life. But have you ever stopped to think about the databases running behind the scenes? Well, it turns out these systems, the ones designed to make our lives easier, can have these massive, often inevitable consequences on the very shape of our cities and on who gets left behind. This screen. We've all been there. That moment of pure frustration when you're trying to get somewhere and your phone just tells you, nope. It feels like bad luck, right? But what if it's not random? What if it's baked into the system by design? That's exactly what we're digging into. All right, here's our plan. We're going to start by breaking down what the ghost zone effect even is. Then we'll look at the code that's creating these divisions and rewind a bit to see the history of how this problem got built into the system. And then we'll get into the push for fairness and explore what a database with a conscience could actually look like.
So, first up, the ghost zone effect. This is where we really see what happens when the digital map just leaves entire parts of a community behind, pretty much leaving people stranded.
So this term, ghost zone, it actually came out of this pretty shocking study back in 2019. Researchers mapped out ride-hailing services in major cities, and they found this incredibly clear pattern. If you're in a wealthy area, boom, you could get a car almost instantly. But if you were in a lot of low-income and minority neighborhoods, you were effectively invisible to the surface. You were stuck in one of these ghost zones, which has real consequences, right? Like missing a job interview or a doctor's appointment.
And here's the really wild part. These gaps, they're not a bug. They're actually a feature of the system. Which brings us to our next point, how the code itself is literally creating this division through something called algorithmic exclusion.
So that begs the big question, right? Why? Why would a system that's supposed to connect people end up building these invisible walls? Well, the answer is all about what the database is told to care about most. Okay, so it really boils down to this. Ride-hailing algorithms are almost always optimized for one thing: profit. Take a look at the column on the left. That means the system is laser-focused on finding the highest fare in the shortest amount of time. It learns from past ride data, so if drivers keep avoiding an area, maybe because the fares are lower, the algorithm just learns to stop looking there altogether. It creates this vicious feedback loop where less service leads to even less service. Now contrast that with an equity model over on the right. That would be a completely different ballgame. You know, this obsession with pure efficiency, it didn't just pop up overnight. And that brings us to the history of it all, this history of omission, and how we actually got to this point in the first place. The whole story of dispatch technology is really a story of chasing more and more efficiency. Think about it. Back in the 80s, it was all radio calls and paper logs, super manual. Then in the 90s, GPS came along, which was a huge leap forward. But it was in the 2010s, with mobile apps, that everything changed. Algorithms took over, making all the decisions based purely on speed and how much money a trip could make. At every single step, the big goal was efficiency and profit. Fairness? It just wasn't even on the table. So this bias was baked in from the very beginning. And this right here, this is the absolute core of the issue. We tend to think of databases as just these neutral things that hold information, like a mirror to the world. But they don't. By making millions of tiny decisions every single day based on a really narrow set of values, they are actively shaping our world. They reinforce some connections while pretty much erasing others. They create the ghost zones. Well, as you can imagine, this kind of exclusion by design didn't stay invisible forever. The real-world consequences just got too big to ignore, which brings us to our fourth section, the push for fairness and the response from the public and even regulators. The impact was huge, and you could see it everywhere. You had people in some neighborhoods waiting way longer for a ride, or seeing drivers cancel on them at much higher rates. So people fought back. Lawsuits started popping up, accusing companies of algorithmic redlining, which is basically using code to do the same old discriminatory stuff. City transportation departments started demanding equity audits, and we saw this huge push for more transparency and even the rise of totally new public interest platforms. The ghost zones were finally being put on the map for everyone to see. Okay, so after all that, what's the solution? How do we fix this? That brings us to our last section, this idea of building databases that actually have a conscience and designing systems for a future that's a lot more equitable. And the good news is, the solutions aren't some big mystery. We actually know how to build better systems. First, you have to code for equity. That means including fairness constraints right there alongside the efficiency stuff. Second, you have to actively audit the data for bias. Look at wait times, look at cancellations. Third, make geographic coverage, serving the whole city, a key measure of success, not just raw profit.
And finally, demand transparency, because without seeing how these things work, we can't hold these incredibly powerful systems accountable.
And that leaves us with this one big thought to chew on. The same code that built these invisible walls and these ghost zones, it has the power to tear them down. The technology itself isn't good or bad. It's about the values we choose to embed within it. So the real question for all of us is, if we know this code can exclude people, what's it going to take for us to actually use it to build a more inclusive world?